The year 2010 marked a significant turning point in the Arab world, a year that would be remembered for its profound impact on the region. A wave of pro-democracy protests, later known as the Arab Spring, swept across the region, igniting a fervor for change that had been simmering for years. It all began in December, with a seemingly isolated incident in Tunisia, where a street vendor named Mohamed Bouazizi set himself on fire in protest of police corruption and ill treatment. Within weeks, the protests spread like wildfire to Egypt, Libya, Syria, Yemen and beyond, capturing the attention of the entire world. The Arab Spring was fueled by a potent mix of factors, each contributing to the growing unrest. Decades of authoritarian rule, economic stagnation, and social injustice had created a tinderbox of discontent, ready to explode at any moment. Young people, in particular, felt stifled by the lack of opportunity and freedom, their dreams and aspirations crushed by oppressive regimes. The internet and social media provided a platform for their grievances to be aired and amplified, connecting like-minded individuals across borders. The world watched in awe as ordinary citizens, armed with nothing more than their voices and their smartphones, rose up to demand change, challenging the status quo. The Arab Spring represented a powerful assertion of human dignity and a yearning for a better future, a collective cry for justice and equality. It was a moment of great hope, a belief that, even in the most entrenched authoritarian regimes, change was possible, and that a brighter future was within reach. On December 17, 2010, Mohamed Bouazizi, a young Tunisian street vendor, set himself on fire in a desperate act of protest. His desperate act was a protest against the humiliation and harassment he endured at the hands of local officials, who had confiscated his wares and denied him the right to earn a living. Bouazizi's self-immolation became a catalyst, igniting the pent-up anger and frustration of the Tunisian people, who had long suffered under an oppressive regime. Protests erupted in Sidi Bouzid, Bouazizi's hometown, quickly spreading to the capital Tunis and other cities, as people from all walks of life joined the movement. The Tunisian people demanded an end to corruption, unemployment, and political repression, which had plagued their society for decades. They yearned for dignity, freedom, and economic opportunity, hoping for a brighter future for themselves and their children. Faced with mounting pressure, President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, who had ruled Tunisia with an iron fist for 23 years, fled the country on January 14, 2011, seeking refuge in Saudi Arabia. His departure marked the first victory of the Arab Spring, proving that even seemingly unshakable regimes could crumble in the face of popular uprisings, driven by the collective will of the people. Tunisia's revolution became a beacon of hope for the rest of the Arab world, inspiring similar movements in countries like Egypt, Libya, and Syria. It demonstrated the power of peaceful protest and the universal yearning for freedom, justice, and human rights. The fall of Ben Ali sent shockwaves across the region, emboldening citizens to challenge their own autocratic leaders and fight for their rights and freedoms. Inspired by the Tunisian example, protests erupted in Egypt on January 25, 2011. The spark of revolution that began in Tunisia ignited a fire of dissent across the Arab world, with Egypt becoming a focal point of this burgeoning movement. Millions took to the streets demanding the ouster of President Hosni Mubarak, who had been in power for 3 decades. The sheer scale of the protests was unprecedented, with people from all walks of life uniting in their call for change. Cairo's Tahrir Square became the epicenter of the Egyptian revolution, a symbol of the people's determination to reclaim their country. The square, once a bustling hub of daily life, transformed into a battleground for freedom and democracy. The protests in Egypt were met with a brutal crackdown by security forces. The government's heavy-handed response only served to fuel the anger and resolve of the demonstrators. However, the violence backfired, further enraging the protesters and galvanizing international condemnation. The world watched as the Egyptian people stood firm in the face of oppression, their courage inspiring others. On February 11, 2011, Mubarak resigned, sending shockwaves through the region and the world. The resignation marked a significant victory for the protesters and a turning point in the Arab Spring. The wave of uprisings soon spread to other Arab countries. The success in Egypt emboldened activists across the region, sparking movements in nations that had long been under authoritarian rule. In Yemen, protests erupted against President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who had ruled for over 30 years. The Yemeni people, inspired by their neighbors, demanded an end to corruption and tyranny. In Bahrain, a Shia majority population protested against the Sunni monarchy. The demonstrations highlighted deep-seated sectarian tensions and the desire for greater political representation. In Libya, protests against Muammar Gaddafi's regime quickly descended into a bloody civil war. The conflict drew international intervention and underscored the high stakes of the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring had become a regional phenomenon, challenging the status quo in a way that was unprecedented in modern Arab history. The uprisings reshaped the political landscape and left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of the Arab world. While Tunisia and Egypt witnessed the fall of their longtime rulers, the paths of their revolutions diverged. Tunisia embarked on a fragile but ultimately successful transition to democracy. It held its first free and fair elections in 2011, and despite political assassinations and economic challenges, has managed to maintain a democratic system. Egypt's transition was far more tumultuous. The military, which had played a pivotal role in Mubarak's ouster, was reluctant to relinquish power. The Muslim Brotherhood, a well-organized Islamist group, won the first democratic elections in 2012, but their rule proved to be short-lived. In 2013, the military, backed by popular protests against the Brotherhood's rule, staged a coup, removing President Mohamed Morsi from power. The ensuing crackdown on the Brotherhood plunged Egypt back into authoritarian rule, albeit under a different guise. The hope for a democratic Egypt once so bright seemed to dim. In Libya, the protests against Muammar Gaddafi's 42-year rule quickly escalated into a full-blown civil war. Gaddafi, a ruthless dictator, responded to the protests with brutal force, determined to cling to power at all costs. The international community, alarmed by the escalating violence and concerned about the humanitarian situation, intervened militarily. A NATO-led coalition launched airstrikes against Gaddafi's forces, enforcing a no-fly zone and providing support to the rebels. In October 2011, Gaddafi was captured and killed by rebel forces. His death marked the end of his brutal regime, but did not bring peace to Libya. The country descended into chaos, with rival militias vying for control. The Libyan revolution, once hailed as a triumph, became a cautionary tale of the complexities of intervention and the challenges of rebuilding a state after a brutal conflict. The Syrian uprising, which began in March 2011, was met with brutal repression by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Peaceful protests demanding political reforms and an end to corruption were met with live ammunition, arbitrary arrests, and torture. The situation in Syria quickly spiraled into a full-blown civil war, with various rebel groups emerging to fight against Assad's forces. The conflict drew in regional and international powers, each with their own agendas, further fueling the violence. The Syrian civil war became a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions. Millions of Syrians were displaced internally and externally, seeking refuge in neighboring countries and beyond. The war also created a breeding ground for extremism, with groups like ISIS exploiting the chaos to seize territory. The Syrian uprising, once full of hope for a democratic future, became a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. The West's response to the Arab Spring was marked by a mix of rhetoric and action, often perceived as contradictory and self-serving. The United States, under President Barack Obama, expressed support for the democratic aspirations of the Arab people, but its actions often fell short of its words. The Obama administration was criticized for its slow response to the Syrian crisis, its continued support for authoritarian allies in the region, and its perceived double standards. Europe's response was equally inconsistent, with some countries supporting intervention in Libya but remaining reluctant to get involved in Syria. The West's handling of the Arab Spring left many in the region disillusioned. It fueled accusations of hypocrisy and a belief that the West's commitment to democracy was conditional and self-serving. The Arab Spring exposed the limitations of Western power and the complexities of promoting democracy in a region with its own history, culture, and challenges. A decade after the Arab Spring, the region remains in a state of flux. The uprisings resulted in significant political and social changes, but they also unleashed forces that continue to shape the region today. Tunisia stands as a fragile but enduring example of democratic transition. Despite economic challenges and security threats, it has managed to build a functioning democracy, offering a glimmer of hope for the region. However, in other countries, the legacy of the Arab Spring is more complicated. In Egypt, the hope for democracy has been dashed by the return of military rule. Libya remains mired in chaos and violence, a stark reminder of the challenges of post-conflict reconstruction. Syria is a humanitarian catastrophe with millions displaced and the country in ruins. The Arab Spring was a watershed moment in the history of the Middle East and North Africa. It demonstrated the yearning for freedom and dignity that resides in the hearts of people everywhere. While the uprisings did not usher in a new era of democracy, they have irrevocably altered the political landscape of the region. The fight for democracy in the Arab world is far from over. The challenges are immense, from entrenched authoritarianism to economic stagnation, social inequality, and sectarian conflicts. However, the Arab Spring has shown that change is possible, even in the most unlikely of places. The spirit of the Arab Spring, the courage of ordinary citizens demanding a better future, continues to inspire. It is a reminder that the struggle for freedom and dignity is universal, and that even in the darkest of times, hope endures.